Shalom, how's everyone doing? Today's day 11 of the Kitzur Shulchan, and we'll be learning Siman Beis Seif Daled. Okay, the Kitzur says, Tzarech li tol yadav dafka l'soch kli. The halach is, when a person washes his hands in the morning, still we're dealing with the ruach ra aspect of the netila, as we'll see. You have to pour the water from onto your hands into another utensil. Okay. V'asar lehanos mi'an netila. And one is not allowed to get benefit from that water, like after it touches your hand. You can't get benefit from that water. Mipnei sheruach ra shora aleihem. Because there's a ruach ra in that water, right? Because why are we washing our hands? We're trying to get rid of this like bad spirit that's dangerous. But once the water goes onto it, now that water becomes the danger, right? It went off your hands onto the water. So you have to make sure that not to get benefit from it. That's why you have to then pour it in a place where people don't walk. Fine. So this whole Seif is talking about ruach ra, and this basically it's coming to just this idea that the water that we use to wash our hands after we wash our hands with it has this ruach ra in it that is dangerous. So the first thing he says that you have to wash into a kli. This is coming from the Zohar. The Zohar says you wash from one kli into another kli. The Magen Avraham actually quotes that the second kli you wash into should be like not really such a nice kli. But obviously it's because of this idea that you just don't want it going on the ground, right? That seems to be the main idea. It shouldn't be going it shouldn't go on the ground. So you put it into another kli, then you put it somewhere else. The poskim, they have a discussion a little bit. Let's say it goes on the ground. Like, what do you do now? So the Ishel of Rami Bachach says two things. He says either you could just pour normal water on it. If you pour normal water over the ruach ra water, that will kind of make the ruach ra water buttle, so that will be okay. Or you could just wait for it to dry. Right? Once it dries, maybe it doesn't have that bad effect anymore. Okay, so that's about it going in the ground. And then the Kitzur talks about not getting hana from the water. Right? The Mishmar gives an example. You can't feed it to your animals. But what's really the problem? Like, what's wrong? So the Derech HaChaim says it's not really an issue. It's just we know that these waters are dangerous. So we don't want to, we don't want it to affect anything, right? If you feed it to the animals, we're afraid it's going to have a bad effect on the animal. So therefore he says you should pour it to a place where people don't go. One thing the Kitzur doesn't mention, which the Shari Tshuva brings up, he quotes the Birkei Yosef, that the Birkei Yosef says it's actually usher to say Devarim Shebekdusha by this Ruach Ra water. Right? He says, I'll quote, this is in the Shari Tshuva, in Siman Daled Sifkan Ches, he says, the minig of the Charedim, El Devar Hashem, right, the people who are fearful of Hashem's words, Shalol Lekros Levarich Neged Amayim Shenet Lu Behem Shachris, that this water that's used you shouldn't say like brachos or dvarim shebekdusha or shem Hashem, or even learn by this water. So where's it really coming from? So we could say a few things about this. One we'll learn at a later time is that one's not allowed to say brachos or dvarim shebekdusha in front of like something like disgusting, like tzoa or meraglayim. So maybe this ruach ra water is comparable to that. That might be one thing. And also, if you look in the Zohar says one's not allowed to leave the water even around, right? Once somebody washes his hands in the morning, and there's that pile of ruach ra water, the Zohar has uses a lashon that you're not allowed to leave it around. You're not allowed to leave it around your house. So maybe what the Birkei Yosef is saying is that if you're just going to start saying Devarim Shebekdusha, you're probably going to leave over that water. And we mentioned previous year about this whole idea of not walking Daled Amos without washing. Maybe this might be another reason to be mekel and not to wash exactly right next to the bed, because what's going to happen? You might end up leaving that water around, and that's mefurish in the Zohar that says you can't do that. So that's just an interesting point. So the question really is, do we have to be careful for this Birkei Yosef, who says that you really shouldn't say any Devarim Shebekdusha by the waters? So there's a tshuva. This is from the Shalas Tshuvas Yin Hatov, Siman Yud Beis, and he doesn't buy the whole thing. He doesn't buy this whole chumrah of the Birkei Yosef, because he says we're going to learn there is a halacha that sometimes we wash our hands in the morning and we don't get rid of the ruach ra. We'll see at a later time that technically, if you wake up in the morning, you have no water, and you still want to daven, you just wipe your hands in a towel, and you're good. You're good to go. But the Shulchan Aruch is clear. You're good to go for davening, and you could daven, but you haven't gotten rid of the ruach ra. So the Tov points out that the Tov points out that we see that me'ikar adin, you're allowed to actually say dvarim shebekdusha while you mamish have ruach ra on you. So we're going to say there's a new halacha that but if there's ruach ra water not on you but in front of you it's aser. That's not mistaber, right? So it's not mistaber. So he says the whole halacha. He doesn't seem he doesn't think there's a grounds for this whole chumrah of the Birkei Yosef. But then he says no, the Zohar actually does say, right? He said you might quote to me the Zohar that says you're actually not allowed to say brachos with ruach ra on your hands, right? There is a Zohar that says that, right? Not like this halacha that we just said in Shulchan Aruch. But still he says, right, the Zohar never says that you can't say brachos in front of water, so we can't just make up things based on based on basically nothing. But how do we hold? So maybe, some people are makbid for this Birkei Yosef. Some people are. However, it's interesting to point out, though, that the Mishnah Berurah doesn't mention it, so something that's not really mentioned in the Mishnah Berurah, it didn't really, it's not going to become so popular, I guess. Okay, shkoich.